On the morning of May 29, 1453, a city wept. Not just any city. The city. The one that had stood, unbreakable, for over 1,000 years while every empire around it crumbled to dust. Constantinople. And on that morning, it fell. In one single catastrophic dawn, the Eastern Roman Empire, the last living breath of Rome itself, was extinguished. But here is what the history books won't tell you. The fall of Constantinople wasn't just a military defeat. It was a slow suicide. Betrayal from within, a church that chose pride over survival, and a 21-year-old sultan so obsessed with this city he had been dreaming about it since childhood. This is the story of how the greatest city on earth died, and why it never had to stay until the end. Because what Emperor Constantine XI said in his final hours before the last battle will genuinely change how you see history. To understand why this fall shook the entire world, you have to understand what Constantinople actually was. Not just a city. An idea. Founded in 330 AD by Emperor Constantine the Great, who looked at the rotting political corpse of Rome and said, "We need something new." He chose a peninsula at the exact crossroads of Europe and Asia, arguably the most strategic location on the planet. To the north, the Golden Horn, a natural harbor so perfect it seemed designed by God. To the south, the Sea of Marmara. To the west, a thin strip of land, which he sealed with the most formidable defensive walls the ancient world had ever seen. He called it Nova Roma, New Rome. The people called it Constantinople. And for 11 centuries, it was the most important city in the Western world. At its peak, a population of 500,000, at a time when London had 15,000 and Paris barely had 20,000. Every trade route between Europe, Asia, and Africa passed through here. Silk from China, spices from India, gold from sub-Saharan Africa. And dominating the skyline, visible for miles, the Hagia Sophia, built in 537 AD. For nearly 1,000 years, the largest building in the world. When Emperor Justinian first walked inside, he reportedly said, "Solomon, I have surpassed thee." The dome appeared to float. Light poured through 40 windows at the base, giving the illusion it hung from heaven by a golden chain. This was Constantinople, the jewel of civilization, and by 1453 it was almost entirely alone. Constantinople didn't fall suddenly. It had been dying for 200 years, and the knife that started the bleeding wasn't held by a Muslim. It was held by a Christian. 1204, the Fourth Crusade, an army of Western European knights, supposedly marching to reclaim Jerusalem, turned on the greatest Christian city in the world. The Venetians had financed the crusade. The Byzantine court was in chaos, and the Crusaders, broke and restless, looked at the wealthiest city on earth. So they took it. For 3 days, Latin crusaders looted Constantinople. They stripped the Hagia Sophia of its gold, melted down sacred relics, burned entire libraries, centuries of Greek and Roman manuscripts, gone forever. Chroniclers wrote that the Muslim Saracens had been more merciful to conquered cities. The Byzantine Empire retook Constantinople in 1261. But the economy was shattered, the population halved, the treasury emptied, and something worse, a spiritual wound that never healed. The hatred the Byzantine Greeks developed for the Latin West after 1204, that hatred would directly cause the fall of Constantinople in 1453. I'll show you how in a moment. After 1204, the Byzantine people came to believe something in their bones. Rome, the Latin West, was the enemy. Not the Turks, the Catholics. As the Ottoman Empire slowly swallowed Byzantine territory, Anatolia, Thrace, Bulgaria, Serbia, the emperors desperately begged the West for help. Pope after pope promised crusades that never came. In desperation, Emperor John VIII agreed to reunite the Eastern and Western churches to accept papal supremacy at the Council of Florence in 1439 in exchange for military aid. His own people revolted. The Grand Duke Lucas Notatus, the second most powerful man in Constantinople, reportedly said, "I would rather see the Muslim turban in the midst of the city than the Latin mite." The second most powerful man in Constantinople preferred Ottoman rule to Catholic influence. The church union collapsed, the promised army never came, and the city was left to face what was coming alone. By 1453, the Byzantine Empire was barely a city-state. What had once stretched from Spain to Syria was now just Constantinople, a thin strip of land and a handful of islands. Population, 50,000, down from 500,000. On the throne sat Constantine Palaeologus, the last emperor of Rome, a man who knew exactly what was coming, and chose to stay anyway. Now the man on the other side of this story. His name was Mehmed II, Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. He was 21 years old. Mehmed had been obsessed with Constantinople since childhood. He read everything about it: Roman chronicles, Greek histories, Arab accounts. He spoke 6 languages. He studied military engineering the way other princes studied poetry. When he came to power in 1451, his courtiers expected caution. He was young, untested. His first act as sultan, begin planning the conquest of Constantinople. He wasn't impulsive. He was methodical. Step 1, cut the city off from its lifeline. The Bosphorus was Constantinople's only supply route, ships from the Black Sea carrying grain and provisions. In 1452, Mehmed built a fortress on the European shore of the Bosphorus, directly across from his father's existing castle on the Asian side. 2 fortresses, 660 meters apart, commanding the narrowest point of the strait. When a Venetian captain ignored the new blockade, Mehmed's cannons sank his ship. The captain was impaled. The crew beheaded. The message was unmistakable. But Mehmed still had one problem: the Theodosian walls. These walls had never been breached in 1,000 years, so Mehmed did something that had literally never been done before in the history of warfare. Coming up, the Theodosian walls were a masterpiece. Not one wall, 3. A 60-foot moat, an outer wall, a terrace, and the main inner wall 40 feet high, 15 feet thick, with massive towers every 55 yards. The Arabs had tried. The Vikings had tried. Nobody got through. But that was before gunpowder. Mehmed found a Hungarian engineer named Urban, one of the greatest cannon makers alive. Urban had first offered his services to Constantinople. The Byzantines couldn't afford him. Mehmed paid whatever he asked. Urban built the basilica cannon, 27 feet long, stone balls weighing 1,200 pounds, audible from 14 miles away. So massive it took 60 oxen and 400 men to move. It could only fire 7 times a day. It needed hours to cool between shots. But when it fired, it could knock a section of the Theodosian walls to rubble. The walls that had stood for 1,000 years were not built for this. April 2nd, 1453, the Ottoman army appeared. Mehmed's force, 80 to 100,000 men. Constantine's defenders, 7,000. 7,000 soldiers defending 14 miles of walls, 1 man for every 11 feet. The bombardment began April 6th. Each day, the basilica cannon pounded the same section of wall, the weakest point, where the terrain dipped in the valley of the Lycus River. The sound, witnesses wrote, was like the voice of God. Each night, the Byzantines worked by torchlight, filling breaches with rubble, timber, barrels of earth. Each morning, the cannons fired again. For weeks, it was holding. A Genoese commander named Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, who had sailed in with 700 of his own troops, became the spine of the defense. Rotating soldiers, organizing repairs, holding the line. For a man defending a city with 7,000 men against 80,000, he was performing miracles. But then came the move that changed everything. What Mehmed did next is one of the most audacious military maneuvers in history. A move so strange that historians still debate whether it was genius or madness. Stay with me. Constantinople's northern harbor, the Golden Horn, was protected by a massive chain stretched across its mouth. The Ottoman fleet had tried to break through and failed. Mehmed needed ships inside that harbor. He couldn't get them through the chain, so he moved them overland. I want you to really hear that. 70 ships. Over a mountain. His engineers built a greased slipway planks and animal fat from the Bosphorus shore, up over the hill north of Galata and down into the Golden Horn. On the night of April 22nd, 70 fully rigged Ottoman warships were hauled by oxen and hundreds of men over that hill. By morning, the Golden Horn was full of Ottoman ships. The harbor walls, stripped of defenders to reinforce the land walls, were now exposed. Constantinople was surrounded on all sides. The city had perhaps days left. Inside the city, the omens were multiplying. A lunar eclipse. An unexplained fog. And then witnesses reported seeing the dome of the Hagia Sophia glow with an eerie light, as if flames rose around it into the sky. The emperor's advisors told him, "The Holy Spirit is departing. Constantinople is forsaken." Constantine XI listened. He wept. And then he got up and went back to the walls. I want to spend a moment on Constantine because history has not been kind enough to him. He was offered safe passage. The Venetian ships were preparing to leave. His advisors begged him to sail, to survive, to fight another day. His answer, recorded by multiple witnesses, "It would be impossible for me to leave. How could I abandon the churches of our Lord, and his servants, and the throne? What would the world say?" He knew he was going to die. He chose to die as an emperor. On the night of May 28th, Constantine walked through the city for the last time, visiting every commander, every minister, asking each one to forgive him for any wrong he had done. Then, he went to the Hagia Sophia. For the first time in months, it was open Latins and Orthodox together, who had barely spoken in weeks, praying side by side in the candlelit darkness. Witnesses wrote that everyone wept, including the emperor. After the service, Constantine rode to the walls one final time. And waited. The final assault. The unlocked gate. And what Constantine XI did in his very last moments, don't go anywhere. 30 in the morning. May 29th, 1453, Mehmed gave the order. 3 waves. First, irregular troops, volunteers, and conscripts sent forward to exhaust the defenders. They fought for 2 hours in the breach and were slaughtered. Second, Anatolian Turkish regulars, better trained. They pushed hard, but Giustiniani held. For hours, the attack stalled. Mehmed reportedly threatened to personally execute any officer who ordered a retreat. And then fate, in the form of an unlocked door. Somewhere along the Blaserne walls, a small gate called the Kirkaporta had been left unbolted. Whether by accident or treachery, historians still argue. A group of Ottoman soldiers found it. 50 men slipped through. They appeared on top of the walls behind the defenders. Ottoman flags went up on the towers. And the cry went through the Byzantine lines, "The city is taken." In the psychology of battle, those 4 words are sometimes deadlier than any weapon. Panic spread. Then, Giustiniani was hit. A bolt through his armor. He asked the emperor for the key to the gate leading into the inner city. Constantine begged him to stay. Giustiniani left. And when the defenders saw their best commander retreating, the defense collapsed. Men threw down their weapons and ran. The walls were abandoned. The Ottomans poured through. What happened to Constantine XI in his final minutes is not precisely known. No survivor gave a clear account. What we know, when he understood the walls were lost, he tore off his imperial regalia, the cloak bearing the double-headed eagle of Rome. He drew his sword, he charged into the oncoming Ottoman soldiers, and was never seen alive again. His body was never definitively identified. The last Roman emperor died in the breach anonymous, unburdened of his throne, reduced to exactly what he had always been, a soldier. By mid-morning, it was over. The Hagia Sophia filled with refugees praying for divine intervention. When Ottoman soldiers broke down the doors, the congregation fell silent. An imam climbed to the pulpit. The Eastern Roman Empire, direct continuation of Caesar Augustus, of Constantine the Great, of Justinian, which had lasted 123 years, was ended. Mehmed rode in that afternoon. 21 years old. He walked through the Hagia Sophia barefoot, as a gesture of reverence. He reportedly wept not in triumph, but in grief at the emptiness of the palaces. He quoted the Persian poet Sa'di, "The spider spins his web in the palace of the Caesars." He was not a monster. He genuinely admired the civilization he had conquered. He declared himself the new Caesar. He invited the Greek patriarch back and gave him a charter of religious protections. But the shock in Europe was profound. The Silk Road, now fully in Ottoman hands, became so expensive that European monarchs began funding desperate searches for alternative routes to Asia. Columbus sailed west in 1492. Vasco da Gama rounded Africa in 1498. The fall of Constantinople launched the Age of Discovery, and hundreds of Byzantine scholars fleeing west carrying Plato, Aristotle, Euclid in their arms helped ignite the Italian Renaissance. The entire modern world order flows partly from that morning in May 1453. I keep coming back to Constantine XI. And the choice he made. He could have left. Every rational calculation said, survive, regroup, fight another day. He stayed, not because death was glorious, it wasn't, but because he understood that some things are worth more than survival. The Hagia Sophia still stands. The Byzantine mosaics are still there behind the calligraphy panels. Christ Pantocrator, the Virgin Orans. Still watching, still present. A civilization almost entirely erased. Almost, because ideas never really die. They just go underground. And wait, if you made it this far, thank you. This is what Sacred and Untold exists for. The stories the mainstream skips. The civilizations that don't fit neatly into any single narrative. Drop a comment. What part of this hit you the hardest? Subscribe to learn more about the history you were not taught in school.